I remember that day as clearly as if it were etched in stone, the day everything in my life began to turn upside down. It was a drizzly morning in Portland, Oregon, where the gray sky seemed to press down heavily on my shoulders. I, Sebastian Fisher, 36 years old, a crime fiction writer, walked into the courtroom with my heart pounding like a drum, yet doing my best to appear as calm as possible on the outside. The courtroom was packed. There were strangers' faces, curious reporters, and familiar people who had now become so alien to me that it sent chills down my spine. I sat alone on the defendant's side, no private attorney, no one beside me for support. Directly across from me was Angela Fisher, my wife, or rather soon-to-be ex-wife, 34 years old, her golden blonde hair neatly pinned up, her makeup carefully applied to make her look like a pitiable victim. Next to her sat her entire family. Her parents, Riley and Camille Langley, wearing grave expressions, along with cousins and relatives I'd barely ever met. They sat in a solid row like an unbreakable wall ready to crush me. Cold sweat ran down my spine the moment the judge banged the gavel to open the session. That sound echoed in my head like a death knell for the broken years of our marriage. Angela was called first. She stood, her voice trembling yet convincingly dramatic, as though she were recounting a tragic story in which I was the villain. She began, looking straight at the judge, began, "Your Honor, Sebastian is a writer, but he is poor. He has no stable income and has never provided any financial support to the family. For all 8 years of our marriage, we have lived entirely on the Langley family, my parents. He contributed nothing. He just stayed home writing, daydreaming about books nobody reads." Her words cut into my heart like a knife. I sat silently, fingers gripping the edge of the table, trying to suppress the rage rising inside me. We had once loved each other. We had promised to stay together through richness and poverty. Yet now, she was now painting me as a worthless man. I knew the real reason. Rosie, our 8-year-old daughter, and the entire fortune Angela wanted to swallow whole. But I said nothing, not yet. I only looked at her, hoping to find even a trace of the woman I once loved. It was useless. Her eyes were ice cold, as if she were looking at a complete stranger. Then her attorney, a fat middle-aged man in an expensive suit, stood up. He submitted to the court a thick stack of documents, bank statements in Angela's and her parents' names. With a sarcastic tone, he declared, "Your Honor, here is clear evidence. The suburban Portland house, monthly living expenses, even Rosie Fisher's tuition. Everything has been paid for by the Langley family. Not a single cent from Mr. Sebastian Fisher. He doesn't even have a stable personal bank account." He turned toward me, raising his voice as if addressing the entire room. "A man who cannot earn enough to support himself. How can he possibly have the right to seek custody of a child? On what basis does he demand a share of the assets? This is not fairness, Your Honor. This is harsh reality." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. Whispers spread through the gallery, pitying glances toward Angela, and shakes of the head in my direction. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. I had prepared for this, but hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. Rosie sat in the corner beside a social worker, her big round eyes looking at me with worry. She was thin, with jet black hair like mine, and the smile I loved most was now twisted in fear. I wanted to run to her, hug her, tell her everything would be all right, but I couldn't. This trial was about her future, and I had to win. Next came my father-in-law, Riley Langley. The wealthy businessman with a silver beard and razor-sharp eyes took the witness stand. "Sebastian is useless," he said bluntly, his deep voice dripping with contempt. "From the day he married my daughter, he has never created any material value for the family. We had to carry everything. The house, food, even clothes for our granddaughter. He just sits at home writing, living in fantasy. A parasitic husband like that, how is he worthy of Angela?" I clenched my teeth, blood rushing to my face. Riley had never respected me, not from day one. He always believed I wasn't in the same league as the Langleys, who made their fortune in real estate. But I stayed silent and let him finish. Then it was my mother-in-law's turn. Camille Langley, an elegant older woman wearing a sparkling diamond necklace, wept theatrically, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, though I knew it was all an act. "My son-in-law has been a burden on the family," she sobbed. "He does nothing while my daughter suffers. We tried to help, but he was never grateful. And now he wants custody of Rosie? Heavens, how could someone like him possibly take care of my granddaughter?" Her words were like repeated stabs. The courtroom was tilting further and further in their favor. I could feel the shift in the air, nods of agreement from the gallery, smug smiles from the opposing counsel. But the worst moment was when I noticed Eric Lawson sitting right beside Angela. My wife's lover was in the courtroom in a sleek suit, exuding wealth and wearing an undisguised, triumphant smirk. He sat next to Angela, occasionally turning to give me a cold, mocking glance. The look of someone who knew every detail of the plot yet calmly enjoyed watching the other man's tragedy unfold. I knew exactly who he was. The man who had wormed his way into my marriage for the past 2 years. The man who destroyed my family. And now he sat beside my wife like a victor, perfectly at ease while the trial crushed whatever was left of my life. Yet I remained silent. No shouting back, no rebutting every point. I just sat there, my face an absolute mask of calm, even though a storm raged inside me. I knew they were waiting for me to explode, to lose control and prove I was the weak one. But no. I had waited far too long for this moment. All those years of being looked down upon, called a parasite, excluded from every decision. Everything would end today. By now the entire courtroom had formed a single picture. I was the failure. Angela, the financially abandoned victim. The judge, a stern older man with gold-rimmed glasses, kept directing questions at me. "Mr. Fisher, can you explain your financial situation? How do you intend to support your daughter without a stable income?" His tone grew increasingly skeptical, clearly leaning toward the Langley side. Each question felt like a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I stood up, my legs slightly shaky but my voice steady. "Your Honor, I have some documents I would like to submit." I took from my briefcase the carefully prepared stack of papers. Tax returns for the past 3 years, royalty statements from publishers, records of the discreet trust company I had established, and notarized contracts for film adaptations of my books. My hand trembled slightly as I handed them to the clerk, but I kept a faint smile on my lips. The judge took them and began reading. At first, his face remained stern, eyebrows furrowed. Then, little by little, his eyes widened. His mouth fell open in surprise. He flipped the pages faster, muttering something under his breath. The courtroom fell completely silent. Every eye was on him. Suddenly, he let out a loud laugh, a resounding, astonished laugh that made the whole room jump. "Well now, this is quite interesting," he said, trying to suppress further laughter. "We will take a recess for deliberation. The hearing will resume in 30 minutes. The mood in the courtroom instantly turned ice cold. Angela whipped her head around to stare at me, panic clear in her eyes. Her face went pale, her hands clutching her dress. Riley and Camille whispered urgently to each other, looking uneasy, as if the solid ground beneath them had just shifted. Eric sat frozen, his smug smile gone, replaced by visible alarm. They all stared at me, searching for any clue, but I remained perfectly composed, sitting back down with my arms folded across my chest. Inside, a wave of deep satisfaction surged through me. They had no idea. They had never known. And this moment, the moment the truth finally began to surface, was one I had waited for a very, very long time. During the short recess, I sat quietly in a corner of the hallway, away from the buzzing crowd. Rain was still pattering against the windows, the drip-drip sound matching the rhythm of my heart as it slowly returned to normal. I looked toward Rosie, my thin 8-year-old daughter, sitting with the social worker in the far corner of the room. Her big eyes were filled with both fear and confusion, like a lost little rabbit surrounded by wolves. She looked at me, lips pressed tightly together, and that moment sent the entire memory of our marriage flooding back, like an old film reel playing in reverse inside my mind. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the images from the past carry me away. From the very first day, the Langley family had never truly respected me. I clearly remember the first time Angela brought me to meet her parents at their suburban Portland home. Riley Langley, with his silver beard and booming voice, sized me up from head to toe as if I were merchandise. "A writer, huh? Sounds fancy, but what about the future? My daughter needs a solid man, not some daydreamer." Camille was more refined, but her eyes dripped with disdain. "Sebastian, dear, which little country town in Oregon did you grow up in? One look at your style and it's clear, rustic in the truest sense." They always saw me as a penniless writer with no prospects, a parasite living off them, someone who would never be on their level. In the beginning, Angela still encouraged me. She was the woman I met in a small coffee shop while I was working on my very first manuscript. She smiled brightly, eyes sparkling. "I love your writing style, Sebastian. It's so full of emotion. Don't listen to anyone who puts you down. Just focus on your career and I'm sure you'll make it big." When her parents criticized me, she defended me. "Mom, Dad, Sebastian is trying his best to improve. He's not a freeloader." In those moments, I felt truly warm, as if I finally had a real partner by my side. We married after a year of dating, and Rosie arrived like a gift from heaven. But gradually, the pressure from the Langley family grew heavier. They paid for the wedding, for our first house, and began interfering more and more. "What do you expect from someone like Sebastian? He'll never be able to support a family. Let Mom and Dad take care of it." At first, Angela pushed back, but eventually she grew tired. She started repeating their words. "You keep writing and writing, Sebastian, but where's the money? I'm exhausted." Her attitude changed. She began to look down on my profession. "Writing is a hobby, not a career. You should get a real job." I realized I was slowly being excluded from every important family decision. Finances. Riley was always the one signing the checks for bills. The house. They bought a new one without even asking me. Even how to raise Rosie. I tried to speak up, but my words were ignored. I felt like a ghost in my own home. Every evening when Angela came home late from work, she would rush to call her parents, while I sat alone in front of the computer screen, silently editing line after line of manuscript. My heart ached many times, but I chose to endure it. Why? Because of Rosie. She was the only reason I kept going. Whenever Rosie ran to me, wrapped her little arms around me, and whispered in her sweet, childish voice, "When you're done with work, will you tell me a story, Daddy?" I swallowed all my pride and pain. Rosie, with her jet black hair and radiant smile, was the reason I got up every morning, the tiny light in the darkness of a marriage that was slowly dying. I remember the hardest years. I wrote for 18 hours a day, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, hands shaking on the keyboard. I sent manuscripts to dozens of publishers and received rejection after rejection. The content isn't compelling enough. No breakthrough ideas. The refusal letters piled up like trash. Some nights I sat alone in my study, staring out at the rain, wondering if they were right. If I really was just a hopeless dreamer. By then, Angela had already grown distant. "You keep writing, but I never see any money. I have to ask Mom and Dad again." I felt utterly alone, but I didn't give up. I started posting my stories on online forums and slowly built a small, loyal readership. They encouraged me. "Your stories are amazing. Keep going, Mr. Fisher." That was my fuel. Then 2 years ago, luck finally smiled on me. A small publishing house agreed to work with me. My debut novel, Portland Shadows, was released and unexpectedly became a bestseller. Thanks to the online community that had followed me for years, word spread like wildfire. 5-star reviews poured in. Sales skyrocketed. I signed a long-term contract with a major distributor, and everything changed. Subsequent books continuously hit the bestseller lists. Midnight Obsession, Oregon Secrets. Several were optioned for film adaptations, bringing in huge royalties and licensing revenue. I still remember the moment I received my first big check. My hands were shaking. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, enough to finally stand on my own. I quietly invested all of it through a discreet trust company and private financial funds. I didn't want to show off, and I no longer wanted to depend on the Langleys. Thanks to that, my average annual income reached about $720,000, a figure the Langley family had absolutely no idea about. I kept it secret because I was afraid they would interfere, try to control me, turn me into one of theirs. I used the money to quietly pay off debts and invest in Rosie's future, but I never told Angela. She still believed I was broke and kept complaining, "You can't provide for this family." And it was during this very period, when my career was finally taking off, that Angela started showing strange signs. She came home late more and more often, claiming overtime. She hid her phone, giggled while texting, and grew cold toward me. Our hugs became forced, intimate evenings became rare. I suspected something, but I told myself it was just work stress. Then came the night that broke everything. I came home early and caught Angela cheating with Eric, right in our living room, wrapped in each other's arms, lost in passion. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart shattering into pieces. The last illusions about our marriage vanished in an instant. That same night the fight exploded. I could no longer pretend I hadn't seen anything. I looked Angela straight in the eye and asked about Eric, no beating around the bush. She was silent for a long time, then burst into tears. But those weren't tears of remorse. "I'm tired of you, Sebastian," she said between sobs. "Tired of all the nights you only live for that computer. Eric understands me. He knows what I need." Those words, "he understands me," cut like a knife. I asked again, voice hoarse, "So you're admitting it?" Angela turned her face away. That silence was the clearest answer. Then she said the words I never wanted to hear. "Let's get divorced." And she didn't stop there. She looked at me with an icy glare I'd never seen before. "I'm going to fight for everything, the assets and full custody of Rosie. She deserves a better life. With me, and with Eric's help, everything will be more stable for her." I took a step forward, my heart being crushed. "I don't care about the assets. I only want our daughter. Don't take Rosie away from me. She needs her father." I tried to explain that I had never abandoned Rosie, that I was perfectly capable of providing for her. But my words fell on deaf ears against Angela's cold stare. In that moment I understood. This was no longer a marital argument. This was a calculated seizure of my daughter, my dignity, and my right to be a father. Riley and Camille summoned me for a private meeting and intervened directly. Riley slammed the table. "Who the hell do you think you are? A freeloading writer who now wants to keep the kid? You were never worthy of being a husband, and you're even less worthy of being a father." Camille sneered. "Sebastian, what have you ever done for this family? You drove Angela into Eric's arms. Let her go now." Their words cut like knives, but I chose complete silence. No arguing, no explaining. Instead, I quietly gathered evidence. Tax records, royalty contracts, everything I would need for the day in court. I knew the truth would speak for me when the time came. The recess ended quickly. The judge's gavel struck again, yanking me back to the present. I sat down, heart pounding, but my face remained perfectly calm. Angela and her family were whispering frantically, their eyes filled with unease. They had no idea what was coming. I did. The judge held the thick stack of documents I had submitted. The trace of amusement from his earlier laugh was gone. Now his expression was serious, almost solemn. He cleared his throat and surveyed the room. After reviewing the tax records, royalty statements, and notarized film adaptation contracts and related financial documents, this court confirms that Mr. Sebastian Fisher has an average annual income of $720,000. This figure completely contradicts every claim regarding his financial situation previously made by the plaintiff. His words exploded like a bomb in the middle of the courtroom. In a single instant, the entire atmosphere flipped upside down. The pitying glances that had been aimed at me, the pathetic failure, were now turned into stunned disbelief. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. People gaped, turning to stare at me with wide, incredulous eyes. I felt the shift like an electric current crackle in the air. My heart beat faster, not from fear but from deep, fierce satisfaction. After years of silent endurance, the truth had finally stepped into the light. Angela froze, then collapsed back into her chair as if every ounce of strength had been drained from her body. Her face went deathly pale, eyes bulging, mouth open but unable to speak. Riley gripped the armrests until his knuckles turned white, his face crimson with rage. Camille covered her mouth, blinking rapidly in shock. Eric looked outright panicked. He half stood, then dropped back down, hands trembling as he rubbed his face. The smug grin from earlier had been replaced by the expression of a man caught red-handed. Their entire poor, useless writer narrative had shattered in a single moment. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in the eyes of the people who had despised me for so long. Angela suddenly burst into tears, mascara running down her cheeks. I didn't know anything about this," she cried, voice shaking. "Sebastian never told me. He hid it from me, from all of us." She turned desperately toward the judge, hands flailing as if begging for rescue. Riley and Camille immediately joined the protest. Riley shot to his feet. "This is fraud. He deliberately concealed it to deceive our family. We supported him for years. Now what?" Camille wailed alongside her daughter. "Sebastian, you're cruel. You let us believe you were broke, let us carry everything. This was a conspiracy." The courtroom descended into chaos, shouting, sobbing, frantic whispers. The judge banged the gavel several times. "Order! The court will consider all arguments." I sat motionless, a storm of emotions surging inside me as I watched them scramble. They were trying to turn the tables, but it was far too late. The judge looked at me and nodded. "Mr. Fisher, do you wish to speak?" This was my moment. I stood speaking publicly for the first time in the entire trial, my voice steady despite the slight tremor of emotion. "Your Honor, I have never taken anything that wasn't mine. Every dollar I earned came from my own writing, from best-selling books and completely legal contracts. I stayed silent not to deceive anyone, but to protect what was left of my marriage. I endured humiliation for years in the hope of keeping my family together. My finances have always been transparent to the law. I paid taxes in full and invested responsibly. The Langley family simply never respected me enough to listen. They labeled me a parasite and never gave me a chance to explain." My words echoed through the now silent room. People looked at me differently, no longer as a weak man, but as someone who had quietly endured and prevailed. Angela stopped crying and stared at me with a complicated expression, regret mixed with anger. The judge nodded and ordered, "The court will now trace every dollar that formed the disputed assets and compare it against the plaintiff's prior testimony." The clerk began reading the documents aloud, comparing figure after figure. Everyone held their breath. The statements clearly showed I had quietly paid a significant portion of household expenses, funded Rosie's trust, and was never fully dependent as they had claimed. Angela's and her family's testimony was exposed as exaggerated, distorted, and in several places outright false. After several tense minutes, the judge delivered the conclusion. "Mr. Sebastian Fisher possesses full independent financial capacity. The plaintiff, Mrs. Angela Fisher, and her family deliberately misrepresented the truth in an attempt to seize assets and custody of the minor child. This violates fundamental principles of fairness." The gallery erupted in light applause. The final ruling followed immediately. The court awards Mr. Sebastian Fisher full legal ownership of all disputed assets, including investments and intellectual property rights. Primary physical and legal custody of Rosie Fisher is granted to Mr. Sebastian Fisher, with reasonable visitation rights to Mrs. Angela Fisher. Angela and the Langleys were utterly defeated. Angela collapsed in sobs, no longer able to fight. Riley shook his head, face ashen. Camille clutched her daughter, whispering words of despair. Eric slipped out of the courtroom, avoiding everyone's eyes. When they looked at me now, It was with the bitter, helpless gaze of the vanquished. When the hearing ended, I took Rosie's hand and walked out. Her small, warm fingers curled trustingly around mine. She looked up at me, eyes shining. "Daddy, we don't have to be apart anymore, right?" I smiled, tears rolling down my cheeks. "No, sweetheart. From now on, you're staying with me. Everything's going to be okay." We walked past the broken figures of the Langley family. Angela reached out, stammering Rosie's name, but Rosie didn't turn back. For me, victory wasn't about the money. I already had more than enough to live well. Victory was being able to walk out of that courtroom with my head high, taking my daughter away from a marriage built on lies. All those years of silent suffering had finally been redeemed. I pulled Rosie closer and stepped out into the Portland rain, feeling truly free for the first time in years. Yet even in that sweet moment, memories returned. The sleepless nights writing, the endless rejections, the slow way Angela had turned cold. Now everything was clear. I didn't gloat. I simply felt relief. We walked on, leaving the shattered figures behind us in the courthouse while the rain washed the past away. After the trial, I thought peace would finally come. But the Langleys refused to accept defeat so easily. They kept haunting our lives like ghosts that wouldn't let go. Late-night phone calls would jolt me awake. Riley's voice growling through the receiver. "You think you've won, Sebastian? We'll appeal. We'll take Rosie back." Anonymous legal letters arrived at the house, filled with vague accusations of abuse of custody rights or concealment of assets. Sometimes they even showed up unannounced at Rosie's school gate, pretending to be concerned grandparents. I remember one afternoon when I went to pick her up and saw Camille standing there with a gift bag, wearing a fake smile. "Rosie, Grandma misses you so much. Why don't you come stay with me for a while?" Rosie shrank against me, face pale, and I had to politely but firmly push Camille away. "According to the court order, visitation is scheduled only. Please respect the boundaries." Those moments made my chest tighten in fear. What would they try next to tear Rosie from me? Angela was no exception. She used her scheduled visitation rights as an excuse to probe into our daily lives. She'd arrive at the house with teary eyes and an apparently remorseful face. "Sebastian, I was wrong. I had no idea you were this successful. Please give me a chance to make it right." But the remorse never lasted. Soon the blame would creep in. "You hid everything from me, made me think you were useless. Now Rosie's living with you, but are you sure you're taking good care of her? She looks thinner." Those words were subtle psychological jabs meant to unsettle Rosie and make her doubt me. Once after Angela left, Rosie burst into tears. "Mommy said I should live with her because you're always busy writing." I held her close and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy always has time for you." But inside I was on edge, wondering what move Angela would pull next. I took decisive action. I cut off all unnecessary contact with the Langley family, keeping only the court-mandated channels for visitation. I changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and hired a lawyer to handle every piece of legal correspondence. "We'll limit their harassment as much as possible," my attorney assured me. I agreed because I knew that if I didn't draw a hard line, they would keep tormenting us and turn our new life into hell. The first few weeks I barely slept, lying awake imagining worst-case scenarios about a successful appeals. Gradually, though, I learned to let go. Rosie needed a strong father, and I had to be that man. Life for the two of us slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm, like a calm river after a violent storm. Mornings began with me waking early, brewing strong black coffee, then gently kissing Rosie's forehead. "Time to rise, my little princess. How about Daddy makes toast with strawberry jam today?" She'd rub her eyes, give a sleepy smile, and we'd eat breakfast together in our cozy little kitchen. I'd walk her to school carrying her backpack, chatting about her dreams from the night before. In the afternoons, I picked her up, listened to stories about friends and lessons, and in the evenings we shared simple dinners, homemade spaghetti or fresh salads, then did homework and read together. These moments, which I'd never truly had before because of constant interference from Angela and her family, now felt like treasures that warmed my heart every single day. I turned down long, demanding contracts from publishers. "Sorry, I need time for my family now," I wrote in my replies. Instead, I worked from home while Rosie was at school or asleep. I kept writing. The new books still sold well, but they were no longer my entire world. Rosie was. I remember one evening on the sofa reading Harry Potter together when she giggled and said, "Daddy, you write even better than this wizard." In that moment, I felt real happiness. No more constant anxiety about the future. Rosie blossomed. She laughed more, played, and talked nonstop. The fearful, shrinking little girl from the courtroom days was gone. She ran around the garden with the puppy I'd brought home, cheeks flushed and eyes bright. Seeing her heal made me certain I'd done the right thing. The wounds from the old marriage slowly closed, replaced by simple, everyday joy. Every month I sent money back to my own parents, Michael and Rose Fisher, who still lived in the old wooden house in rural Oregon where I grew up. Before, my unstable income meant I could send little. Now I sent generous, regular amounts along with long phone calls. "How are my boy and my granddaughter doing?" Dad would ask, his voice warm through the line. "We're good, Dad. I'm finally doing right by both my daughter and my parents." For the first time in years, I felt whole. Occasionally on weekends, I drove Rosie back to the countryside to visit her grandparents. Those short road trips through green forests filled the car with her laughter. She picked apples with Grandpa, listened to Grandma's fairy tales, and heard over and over, "We love you so much, Rosie." Grandma Rose's eyes shone as she hugged her. For the first time, I felt what a real family was supposed to be, not the Langley's world of money and control, but a home built on quiet, genuine love. Those moments made my heart race with a new, happy kind of nervousness, like living inside a dream I never wanted to wake from. But the storm had only passed for a little while. A new, silent, and far more terrifying one was gathering on the horizon. Lately, Rosie had been tired all the time. Dizzy spells, unusually pale skin. At first, I thought it was just lingering stress from the divorce. The nights she cried for her mother, the fear during the trial. "Feeling tired, sweetheart? Daddy will make chicken soup," I'd say, trying to nourish her with fresh fruit, fortified milk, extra rest. I took her to the park, played with her to help her relax, and she'd smile and insist, "I'm fine, Daddy." Yet a vague unease began to grow inside me every time I saw her lying listlessly on the sofa, eyelids drooping. I had no idea that these small, seemingly harmless signs were the first whispers of the biggest storm our lives had ever faced. A storm I could never have imagined, one that would shatter our hard-won peace in the blink of an eye. The signs in Rosie grew more obvious day by day, like dark clouds slowly gathering over the calm sky we had only just reclaimed. She began complaining of pain in the upper right side of her belly, sharp, fleeting stabs that made her wince and clutch herself. "Daddy, it hurts a little here." I rubbed her stomach gently and smiled to reassure her. "Probably too much ice cream yesterday, sweetheart. Want Daddy to make you some warm tea?" But then came the frequent nausea, especially after meals. Her skin lost its rosy glow and turned sallow. She weakened so quickly, her little body became skeletal, those big round eyes now dull and lifeless. Every time I looked at her, my heart clenched with dread. Those nights I lay awake, wondering if it was lingering trauma from the divorce, or just a common childhood illness. I doubled down on nutrition. Chicken vegetable soup simmered for hours, fresh fruit smoothies, but she ate less and less, only picking at a few bites before pushing the bowl away. One midday I was working at home, fingers clacking on the keyboard, trying to focus on the half-finished detective novel. Sunlight poured through the Portland window, warm and golden warmth, and I remember thinking it was going to be a good day. Then the phone rang, an unknown number from the school. I picked up and the teacher's panicked voice hit me like a fist. "Mr. Fisher, Rosie fainted in class. We've called an ambulance." She's on her way to the hospital right now. Please come quickly." My heart stopped. The world blurred. "My daughter fainted?" I stammered, the phone slipping from my shaking hand. I bolted out of the house in blind panic, didn't even lock the door, sprinted to the garage, started the car while my mind went blank. On the drive to the hospital, I ran red lights, leaned on the horn, tears streaming down my face without realizing it. For the first time in my life, I felt the pure, ice-cold terror of a father facing the possibility of losing his child. A fear so sharp it stole my breath and made the wheel trembled in my hands. "Hold on, Rosie, Daddy's coming," I muttered over and over, praying, nearly crashing as images of her lying motionless flashed before my eyes. I stormed into the emergency room half mad, shouting down the corridor, "Rosie Fisher, where is my daughter?" Nurses rushed me to her bay, and when I saw her tiny body on the gurney, I froze. After initial stabilization, the attending physician pulled me aside, face grave. "Mr. Fisher, Rosie has severe liver disease. Her liver function is critically impaired. Preliminary blood work shows dangerously elevated liver enzymes and signs of inflammation and damage." The words struck like lightning. I stood paralyzed. "Liver disease? She's only 8. My voice cracked. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll do everything we can, but you need to prepare yourself." I walked into the room and nearly collapsed. Rosie lay there, skin jaundiced under the harsh neon lights, lips cracked and dry, breathing shallowly through an oxygen mask. She opened her eyes weakly and whispered, "Daddy, I'm so tired. I don't want to be here." My heart shattered. I sat beside her, held her tiny hand, tears falling onto the blanket. "I'm right here, baby. You're going to be okay. When you're better, we'll go to the park again, I promise." But inside, terror roared. For the following days, I barely left her bedside. 24 hours a day, no work, no sleep, no food. I spoon-fed her broth, told her stories from my books to make her smile. "Remember the brave little girl in Daddy's new story? She's just like you." Every night I sang the same lullabies my mother once sang to me. Those moments, though agonizing, were filled with love. I held her fragile warmth of her body and silently begged, "Please, God, don't take her from me." But Rosie faded before my eyes. She could barely eat, vomited almost everything, her skin turned a deeper yellow, almost saffron. Sometimes she slipped into delirium from exhaustion, and I had to call her name over and over until she stirred. I watched the monitors obsessively. Every beep felt like the countdown of my own heart. On the 3rd day, the team of specialists delivered the devastating update in a small conference room. "Mr. Fisher, Rosie has progressed to acute liver failure. She's showing coagulopathy and is at high risk of severe complications, internal bleeding or hepatic coma." I sat frozen, nails digging into my palms until they bled. The doctor was blunt. "Medications can only buy time now. They cannot reverse the damage. The liver is too far gone." He might as well have handed me a death sentence. When I managed to ask, voice shaking, How long does she have?" he answered quietly. "Weeks at best. Possibly much less if complications arise. The only real chance was an urgent liver transplant. But the pediatric waiting list for a deceased donor liver can stretch months or years." "Rosie didn't have months. She needs a new liver now," the doctor said, regret heavy in his voice. "Every day drastically lowers her odds. The only viable option was a living donor transplant, ideally from a blood relative for the best match." "You could donate a portion of your liver," he suggested. I immediately signed up for testing. "Draw my blood, scan me, do whatever you need right now," I begged, clinging to the desperate hope that I could give part of myself to save her. But the results were a crushing blow. I was not eligible. Blood type mismatch, immunological factors, and an old mild hepatitis infection in my 20s disqualified me. The last flicker of hope inside me died. I collapsed onto a hallway bench, head spinning. Why is fate doing this to us? The doctor crouched beside me. "We're very sorry, Mr. Fisher. Is there any other close blood relative who could be tested? I looked up. Horse. Her biological mother? Angela Fisher. He nodded urgently. Then you must contact her immediately and get her here for testing. Time is measured in days, maybe less. Every hour counts. That night I sat alone in the cold hospital corridor, back against the wall, staring through the glass at Rosie sleeping fitfully in the ICU, machines humming around her fragile body. I pictured a world without her and nearly broke. How can I beg Angela after everything? I thought, rage and betrayal burning anew. But then I saw Rosie's smile in my mind, bright, trusting, alive, and I knew I would crawl if I had to. Tears streaming, hands trembling, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had once blocked. The ringtone echoed in the silent night, each tone a hammer against my heart. This was the final plea between old hatred and a father's love that refused to let his daughter go. Facing the boundary between life and death for Rosie, I swept away every last shred of hatred, pride, and painful memory. Only one thought remained. I had to save my daughter, no matter the cost. The years of humiliation in court, the sleepless nights after discovering Angela with Eric, everything vanished in that moment. Rosie was everything. She was the reason I had fought, the only light left after the storm of our marriage. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears, and pressed call. The phone rang a few times. Then Angela's voice came through, cold as always. Sebastian, why are you calling me? I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. Angela, it's an emergency about Rosie. We need to meet tomorrow. Silence for several seconds. Then curtly, fine, tomorrow at my place, 10 a.m. Not a single question about our daughter, not a trace of worry. I hung up, heart hammering, dreading the meeting ahead. How could I bow to the woman who had betrayed me? But for Rosie, I would kneel. The next morning, I left the hospital after holding Rosie for a long time. She woke weakly, clutching my hand. Daddy, where are you going? I want to go home. I kissed her forehead, throat tight. I'm going to make you better, sweetheart. Sleep now. I'll be back soon. The doctor pulled me aside. Mr. Fisher, hurry. She doesn't have much time. I drove to Angela's new luxury apartment in downtown Portland, paid for by Eric, no doubt. Memories flooded back, family dinners where I was treated like dirt, Angela giggling on the phone with him. My chest tightened, but I repeated to myself, for Rosie, just give her a chance. I parked, rode the elevator up, palms sweating despite the cool morning air. When the door opened, I froze. It wasn't just Angela. Riley and Camille Langley were there too, along with Eric lounging on the sofa, legs crossed, wearing that familiar mocking smile. It was a cozy little family gathering. Angela's face was stone. Her hair was pulled back severely. Riley and Camille stood by the kitchen island with coffee cups, staring at me like I was an intruder. She led me to the living room. I sat feeling like I'd walked into a lion's den. The air was thick with tension. I didn't waste words. Angela, Rosie is in the hospital. She has acute liver failure. Doctors say she needs an emergency liver transplant. I was tested. I'm not a match. You're the only one who can save her. My voice broke as I described everything. The early symptoms I'd mistaken for stress, the collapse at school, the devastating diagnosis, the days or weeks she might have left. Tears rolled down my face. For the first time since the trial, I bowed my head before Angela and begged, please, Angela, get tested. For Rosie, for our daughter. You're her mother. You have the best chance of being a match. I'm begging you. I dropped to my knees, head lowered, pride shattered. I didn't care. I only waited, heart pounding for her answer. Angela flinched for a split second, eyes widening in shock. But she recovered almost instantly. No tears, no questions about Rosie's condition, just a cool nod. This involves my health. I need to discuss it first. Discuss? While our daughter is dying? The word stabbed me, but I was too desperate to argue. Fine. Discuss. But please, hurry. She doesn't have time. Angela stood and walked into the bedroom with her parents and Eric. The door closed with a sharp click, leaving me alone in their living room. I sat under Eric's smug gaze as he sipped coffee and smirked. So now you need Angela, huh? After stealing the kid in court? I didn't answer. I just stared at the floor, tears falling, every minute feeling like an hour, picturing Rosie on that hospital bed. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the door opened. Angela returned with her parents. Her expression was calm, almost businesslike. "I'll get tested," she said, looking straight at me. "But there's a condition." Hope flickered, then died. "You transfer $3 million to me for emotional distress and health risk compensation. Do that and I'll go." I stared, stunned, barely believing a mother could bargain with her own child's life. $3 million for emotional distress? You're putting a price on Rosie's life? Angela didn't blink. "It's a risk to my health. Take it or leave it." Behind her, Riley gave a small approving nod. Camille looked at me with familiar contempt. This was their final revenge for losing in court. They knew I had the money. They knew I would do anything for Rosie. My heart screamed, but the image of Rosie, pale, barely breathing, flashed in my mind. "Fine," I whispered, voice breaking. "I accept. I'll transfer it right now." Angela nodded. "Money in my account first. Then I go." That same night I went home, hands shaking as I logged in and wired almost everything I had earned from years of writing. The confirmation screen glowed, "Transaction successful." I sent her the screenshot. Her reply was one line, "Received. I'll go tomorrow." Only after the money hit her account did Angela agree to come to the hospital for compatibility testing. The drive there was silent. She sat beside me like a stranger. I glanced at her. "Thank you. For Rosie." She stared out the window and said nothing. A few days later, the results came like a ray of light in total darkness. The doctor called me in. "Mrs. Fisher is a suitable donor. Blood type matches, immunology is excellent. We can proceed." They scheduled the urgent transplant within days. For the first time in weeks, fragile hope bloomed. I sat by Rosie's bed and whispered, "Mommy's going to save you, baby. You're going to be okay." She gave the faintest smile. "Really, Daddy?" I nodded, tears of relief falling. I called my parents. "She has a chance. They found a donor." They wept with me over the phone. But deep down, I had no idea that the very money-for-life deal I had just made was the seed of the darkest tragedy still waiting in the shadows. I thought the worst was over. Angela remained ice-cold, her family indifferent. In the days before surgery, I stayed by Rosie's side, telling stories, singing lullabies, clinging to hope. I prayed every night, terrified and grateful, unaware that the real storm had only just begun. I sat by Rosie's hospital bed day after day, hour after hour, like a soldier guarding the last fortress. The Portland hospital had become my entire world. The sharp smell of disinfectant, the endless beeping of machines, the cold neon light falling on my daughter's jaundiced little face. Rosie lay there, her once bright eyes now dull, her skin the color of withered autumn leaves. I held her tiny hand, stroked her fingers, and whispered stories about our trips to the countryside. "Remember when you picked those red apples and laughed so hard because one fell right on your head?" She gave the faintest smile, her voice barely a breath. "I remember, Daddy. Mommy's really going to save me, right?" I nodded, throat burning. "Yes, baby. Mommy and Daddy are both going to save you." But inside, dread churned. The upcoming transplant was a thread-thin hope suspended between life and death. I lived in a constant state of tension, torn between terror and desperate prayer. Every time a doctor passed, I jumped up. "Any news?" They only shook their heads. "We're just waiting for Mrs. Fisher on the day of surgery." Then late one evening, Angela contacted me again. A short message. "Sebastian, we need to talk." About the surgery. My heart leapt, thinking she was worried about Rosie. The call that followed shattered everything. Her voice was as cold as ever. I need more money. A lot more. For the health risks and long recovery, $2 million. Otherwise, I'm not sure I'll be ready. The words cut like knives. I sank to the floor of the hospital corridor, gripping the phone. Rage and realization hit at once. She was openly blackmailing me, squeezing every last dollar while Rosie lay dying. You're joking. Rosie is dying. She's your daughter, I shouted, voice shaking with fury and despair. Angela remained calm. This is my body. If you want to save her, send the money. I'll keep my word once I have it. I wanted to smash everything around me, but Rosie's fragile life left me no choice. The image of her motionless body flashed in my mind. I swallowed my tears. Fine, I'll send it. After the first $3 million, my finances were almost gone. To raise another $2 million, I had to mortgage the house, the home where Rosie and I had finally begun our new life. I called the bank in the middle of the night, voice hoarse. Emergency mortgage, please. I sold off investments at a huge loss. Those hours I sat at the computer, hands trembling as I confirmed each transaction, heart pounding. What am I doing? But then I saw Rosie's face and whispered, for my little girl. I'd give everything. When the final transfer went through, I sent Angela the proof. Her reply, good. I will now strictly preserve my health so the donation can proceed as planned. I clung to that promise like the last rope over an abyss, even as a faint unease began to grow. She won't abandon our daughter, right? In the following days, I stayed glued to Rosie's side, telling cheerful stories to distract her from the pain. She smiled weakly. When I'm better, I want strawberry ice cream. Deal, I promised. But at night, when she slept, dread returned. Surgery was 2 days away, and Angela had gone strangely silent. The morning of the transplant, the entire medical team waited in high alert. The hospital buzzed from dawn, emergency meetings, operating rooms prepped. I sat in the corridor, fists clenched, cold sweat pouring off me. Rosie was wheeled toward the pre-op area. She looked up at me, terrified. Daddy, I'm scared of the doctors. I hugged her, voice breaking. Mommy will be here any second. Be brave, okay? 8 a.m. came and went. 9. No Angela? I called frantically. Her phone was off, only endless dial tone. Minutes dragged like hours. The surgery had to be postponed. The lead surgeon ran out. Mr. Fisher, where is she? Rosie is critical. We can't wait any longer. My heart stopped. Panic took over. She'll be here, I stammered, but deep down terror exploded. I sped to Angela's apartment in blind hysteria, running red lights, tears blinding me. She can't abandon her own child. The building was silent, curtains drawn, no lights. I pounded on the door, screaming her name. A neighbor, an elderly woman, appeared. They left the night before last. Big suitcases. I heard them say something about a long trip. The words struck like lightning. I collapsed onto the stairs, legs giving out. I knew with sickening certainty that I had been deceived. I raced to the Langley's mansion next, clinging to the tiniest shred of hope. I hammered on the gates. Open up! Where is Angela? Rosie is waiting for surgery. Riley opened the gate, face stone cold. What do you want, Sebastian? Angela ran. Rosie is dying. Camille smirked from behind him. We have no idea where she is. Riley slammed the gate shut. Stop bothering us. You brought this on yourself. I stood in their driveway as the gates closed, the world collapsing a second time beneath my feet. I screamed into the empty air. You monsters! She's your granddaughter. Only the wind answered. I drove back to the hospital like a ghost, nearly crashing several times. I had to tell the doctors the donor had vanished. The lead surgeon looked at me with pity. Mr. Fisher, without a liver. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The following days were slow-motion hell. Rosie slipped away hour by hour, more unconscious, skin deep yellow, breathing shallow and ragged. Every call I made went unanswered. Angela's phone dead. The Langleys had blocked me. Police said it was a civil matter. No miracle came. One rainy morning, the monitors screamed their long, unbroken tone. Doctors rushed in. "Mr. Fisher, I'm sorry. She didn't make it." I held my little girl as she took her last breath, screaming without sound, clutching her cooling body. Rosie, my baby girl. Everything I had sacrificed. Money, pride, the last pieces of my soul had bought nothing but a cold hospital room and the eternal absence of my daughter. I sank to the floor beside her bed, cradling the small, lifeless form that no longer held her warmth. The world went silent and black. In that moment, the man I used to be died with her. Rosie's funeral was held a few days later at a small cemetery on the outskirts of Portland. A steady drizzle fell from the gray sky, as if heaven itself were weeping for my little girl. The tiny white coffin, surrounded by bouquets of roses, her favorite flower, looked heartbreakingly fragile in the rain. Only a handful of relatives and close friends attended. They hugged me, whispered condolences. "We're so sorry about Rosie, Sebastian. She was an angel." But the ones who hurt the most were my own parents, Michael and Rose Fisher. They had flown up from the countryside the moment they heard, faces gaunt with grief and exhaustion. My father, silver-bearded, hands calloused from decades of farming, gripped my shoulders hard. "We're here, son." My mother sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to me. "Rosie, my granddaughter. How could God be so cruel?" They held my hands the entire time, terrified that this final blow would break what little was left of me. They knew I had already lost everything, my marriage and now my daughter. "Sebastian, you have to keep living," Dad said, voice trembling. "For Rosie's sake, you have to be strong." But every time I glanced at that small white coffin, my heart tore into smaller pieces. I remembered her running through the garden, laughing, "Daddy, come catch me." Now she lay silent forever. The service was brief. The priest's prayers, candles lit in the rain. I stood like a statue, numb, waiting only for it to end so I could face the pain alone. When everyone else had gone, melting away under the drizzle, I remained alone before Rosie's grave. My eyes were bloodshot from crying and sleepless nights. My fists were clenched so tightly that my nails drew blood. The little headstone read, "Rosie Fisher, our little angel." I knelt, touched the cold earth, and whispered an oath. "Rosie, my precious baby girl, I swear I will get justice for you. I will make the people who abandoned you when you needed them most pay for what they did. They will regret it for the rest of their lives." Those words burned inside me like a flame rising from the ashes of grief. I was no longer the weak Sebastian they once knew. Loss had forged me into something else, someone filled with rage and unbreakable resolve. I stood, wiped the rain and tears from my face, and walked away through the downpour. The journey for vengeance had begun. Back home, the house was a hollow shell. Every corner screamed Rosie's absence. The sofa where she used to read, the kitchen where we cooked together, her bedroom covered in her drawings. I collapsed on the floor and cried until there was nothing left, then forced myself to stand. "Not yet," I told myself. "I can't fall now." I began gathering evidence. Bank transfers to Angela, 3 million, then 2 million. Appointment records, text messages, even recordings of our final calls. I organized everything into a folder after folder, hands shaking as I reread her cold promise. "I will strictly preserve my health so the donation can proceed." Rage and anticipation boiled inside me. I realized the Langleys had almost certainly known about Angela's escape plan from the moment she demanded the second payment, perhaps even helped her. They hadn't looked surprised when I showed up. Their eyes had darted away, their lies too smooth. I hired a lawyer and laid it all out. They defrauded me, and through that fraud caused my daughter's death. He nodded grimly. "We have grounds. Fraud with fatal consequences. But before the legal machinery started turning, I needed answers. I drove to the Langley mansion one stormy afternoon, heart pounding with dread and fury. The gate was open. Riley and Camille sat on the covered porch drinking tea as if nothing had happened. They pretended surprise when they saw me. Riley stood. "Sebastian, you've got some nerve showing your face here." Camille covered her mouth, but her eyes avoided mine. I charged forward. "Where is Angela? You knew she was running, didn't you? You let her abandon Rosie. My daughter, your granddaughter, is dead because of your silence." They denied everything. Riley shook his head. "We don't know anything. Angela is an adult. She makes her own choices." Camille added coldly, "Where my daughter goes is none of your business. Stop making a scene." But when I shoved the transfer records and surgical schedule in their faces, their composure cracked. Riley's face turned crimson with rage. "If you hadn't been so pathetic and stupid, none of this would have happened. You think you're a good father? You let Rosie die because you couldn't even save her yourself." Camille spat venom. "Our granddaughter died because you weren't healthy enough to donate. Don't blame others. You pushed Angela to this point." Their words were slaps in the face, proof they had no humanity left. They didn't shed a single tear for Rosie, only contempt and blame. I whispered, voice shaking with barely contained fury, "You will pay for this." Then I turned and walked away. I got nothing more from them. I drove home through the storm, rage burning hotter than ever. That night I took every document, every transaction, every detail, and filed a formal criminal complaint. Sitting in the police station, I told them everything. They extorted $5 million from me, then disappeared, causing the death of my daughter. The detective took notes and nodded. "We'll open an investigation. The evidence is solid." I left the station soaked to the bone, heart pounding with a mixture of grief and grim anticipation. The road to justice had officially begun, but the pain never left me. It only transformed into something colder, sharper, and unstoppable. In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow, drifting through an empty house where every corner screamed Rosie's name. I sat for hours at my desk staring at the evidence. Bank statements showing the transfers, Angela's cold messages, the surgical schedule she never honored. Rage boiled inside me, intertwined with bottomless grief. I called my lawyer every day. "Any news?" He tried to calm me. "The police are working. Your evidence is rock solid." But time crawled like hell. Every night I woke drenched in sweat from dreams of Rosie calling for help, heart pounding, waiting for the phone to ring with news from the station. Finally, after an endless week, the lead investigator called. "Mr. Fisher, we have a breakthrough. Come to the station now." I raced to the Portland Police Headquarters, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The detective, a middle-aged man with a gravelly voice, led me to a conference room. On the table lay printouts, traffic camera photos, and maps. From the bank data, he began pointing at the statements. "We confirmed Angela and Eric Lawson left the city just hours after receiving your final transfer. They withdrew huge amounts in cash and moved quickly across multiple states, heading north. Oregon to Washington, Idaho, Montana." I sat frozen, picturing them laughing in the car with my money while my daughter lay dying. Traffic cameras caught Eric's SUV. He continued sliding photos toward me. Grainy images in the rain, but unmistakable. Angela in the passenger seat, Eric driving, luggage piled high in the back. My chest tightened with fury. "They fled right after promising to save my daughter?" The detective nodded gravely. "Exactly. They were careful, avoiding major highways, but we tracked them through cameras and credit card pings. They were heading for the Canadian border. Canada. They planned to disappear across an international border with the money they'd extorted while Rosie died." I gripped the table, tears falling. "You have to catch them. We already have the FBI involved, interstate fraud and flight across borders. We'll get them." I left the station with a flicker of hope, but the pain still bled fresh, every minute of waiting pure torment. A few days later came the call I had prayed for. "Mr. Fisher, we got them." Federal agents and Border Patrol intercepted Eric's SUV at a remote crossing near Montana. A short chase, then surrender. They seized nearly all the cash I had sent, passports, phones, everything. Angela and Eric were handcuffed on the spot and flown back to federal custody. I collapsed on the floor when I heard tears streaming, whispering to Rosie's photo on the mantle. "They're caught, baby girl. Daddy's going to get justice for you." The joy was brief. The grief never left. It only grew colder. I flew to the FBI field office in Seattle to identify them and give additional testimony. Through one-way glass, I saw the arrest photos and video. Angela sobbing, Eric pale and silent, both in cuffs. "That's them," I said. "They defrauded me and let my daughter die." I recounted every detail, from the begging in her apartment to the money for life deal to the morning they vanished. The agent nodded. "Your statement is crucial. The evidence is airtight." Under pressure, Riley and Camille were summoned as accessories after the fact. They arrived with lawyers, faces drawn, arrogance gone. I didn't see them, but I knew they were finally afraid. At first, Angela and Eric denied everything, claiming it was just a civil financial agreement. Angela wept in interrogation. "I never wanted her to die. I panicked. I was terrified of the surgery. I only thought about saving myself." Eric smirked. "It was a voluntary transaction. At worst, a contract dispute, not fraud." Then the investigators laid out the full chain. 2 massive transfers from my accounts, traffic cam footage of their flight, the timeline showing they left the night before surgery, text messages between them, Eric writing, "Money's in, let's go." The net closed. Angela broke first, sobbing. Eric and I planned to take the money and run. I was scared of dying on the operating table. Eric followed, admitting he masterminded the escape. Riley and Camille were forced to admit they knew the plan and stayed silent, even supplied extra cash. Phone records and neighbor statements sealed it. A few months later, the federal criminal trial began in Portland, drawing wall-to-wall media coverage. Mother sells daughter's life for millions. Medical fraud ends in child's death. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing cameras, sensational headlines everywhere. I sat in the victims section, heart pounding, watching Angela and Eric let in wearing shackles, faces gone. Riley and Camille sat behind them, unable to meet my eyes. The prosecutor laid it out plainly. Defendants Angela Fisher and Eric Lawson defrauded Sebastian Fisher of $5 million, with a false promise to donate a liver to save his dying daughter, then fled, causing Rosie Fisher's death. Riley and Camille Langley aided and abetted by concealing the crime. I took the stand and told the whole story, voice breaking. The courtroom was silent except for quiet sobbing from the gallery. After 3 tense days of testimony, the judge delivered the verdict. Angela Fisher is sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for organized fraud resulting in death. Eric Lawson receives 7 years as principal accomplice and for flight to avoid prosecution. Riley and Camille Langley each received 2 years for accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. The courtroom buzzed. Angela collapsed in tears. Eric stared at the floor. The Langleys went ashen. The judge ordered full restitution. Every dollar seized from them would be returned to me through enforced collection. I sat motionless as the gavel fell. Justice had come, but far too late. When court adjourned, I walked out quietly. Reporters swarmed. "Mr. Fisher, how do you feel now that justice has been served for your daughter?" I only shook my head and kept walking into the Portland sunlight. No prison sentence could bring Rosie back. She was gone forever, taking the best part of me with her. But this was the only justice I could still give her. The vow I made at her grave fulfilled. I drove straight to the cemetery, laid a fresh bouquet of roses on her small headstone, and whispered, "It's done, my love. They paid for what they did." A gentle breeze stirred the trees as if she were answering. The pain will never leave me, but justice has spoken. One agonizing chapter of my life is closed. Rosie will live in my heart until the day I join her. After all the legal proceedings finally closed, I felt as though one small piece of my soul had been set free, but the rest remained crushed under the weight of loss. The sentences were carried out. Angela and Eric were led away to prison. Riley and Camille followed, hollow-eyed, stripped of every trace of their former arrogance. The media frenzy lasted a few more weeks, but I turned off the television and avoided newspapers. I no longer wanted to hear it. Justice had come, but it was far too late to bring Rosie back. I decided to sell the old house in Portland, the place saturated with unbearable memories of a broken marriage and my daughter's death. The kitchen where we once cooked together laughing. Rosie's room with her drawings still taped to the walls, every corner now only caused pain. I called a realtor, signed the papers quickly, and never looked back. The proceeds from the sale, together with the court-ordered restitution, were enough to breathe again. But money had become nothing more than meaningless numbers. With part of what remained, I bought a small wooden house in rural Oregon, close to where my parents lived. It was simple, with an apple orchard out back and a little stream murmuring nearby. The same kind of place I grew up in, free of the ghosts of Portland. I moved there carrying only a few of Rosie's things. The bracelet she made herself, her favorite children's books, and her photograph, which I placed on my writing desk. My parents welcomed me with open arms. "Welcome home, son," Dad Michael said, eyes shining. Mom Rose hugged me and cried, "We'll get through this together." I chose to live near them so I could care for them in their old age. Dad was frailer now. Mom's joints ached constantly. In those first days, I often sat alone on the porch, staring at the green fields, heart pounding with the question, could I go on living without Rosie? But slowly, very slowly, a new life began to flow, quiet and steady like the stream behind the house. My days became calm and unhurried, far from the noise of the city and the pressure of deadlines. Mornings. I woke early, brewed strong black coffee, then drove Dad to the county clinic for his back pain. "You don't have to keep doing this, son," he'd grumble. I'd smile. "Let me take care of you, Dad. I've neglected family long enough." Afternoons. I helped Mom in the garden, weeding, watering, picking fresh vegetables. "You're just like when you were little, Sebastian," she laughed, "always playing in the dirt." Those simple moments eased the pain, even if only for a while. Evenings. I sat at my desk under the warm glow of a single lamp, listening to crickets outside the window. I no longer wrote gripping crime thrillers. Those stories now reminded me too much of my own life. Instead, I wrote gentle tales about fatherhood, loss, and hope, a way to keep living, to preserve the humanity that life had nearly crushed out of me. I still published, but no longer chased fame or sales. Big contracts arrived. I turned most of them down. "Thank you, but I need time for my family now." I wrote slowly, each page a conversation with Rosie. The first book after the tragedy I titled Rosie's Light, the story of a father who loses his child and learns painfully how to keep going. It didn't sell like the old bestsellers, but letters poured in. "Your story touched my heart. Thank you for sharing it." Those letters made my heart race because my pain had not been wasted. It was helping others heal. With royalties and the restitution money, I established the Rosie Fisher Fund for children with liver disease and emergency transplant cases. The idea came during one sleepless night when I thought of all the parents who, like me, stood helpless before their child's illness, lacking money or hope. I worked with my lawyer and the doctors from the old hospital. The fund was set up quickly. I announced it online with a short version of Rosie's story. Donations flooded in, from readers, from strangers who had followed the trial. We paid for testing for a little girl in California, covered surgery for a boy in Texas. Every grateful letter from parents, "Thanks to your fund, my child has a second life. We will never forget you," reminded me this was the only way Rosie's death would not be meaningless. Each time I signed a check, I whispered, "You're still saving lives, baby girl." Many years later, on a quiet autumn afternoon in 2030, I returned to the cemetery where Rosie rests. I was 45 now, silver threading my hair, but my heart still felt young because of her memories. I drove slowly down the familiar road carrying a small bouquet of roses, her favorite. The cemetery was peaceful. Golden leaves drifted in the cool breeze. I knelt at her stone, laid the flowers down, and touched the engraved name. "I came to visit you, Rosie," I whispered, voice trembling. I stood there a long time, looking back over the entire journey. The first divorce trial where I turned the tables with proof of my wealth. The memories of a crumbling marriage. The brief, precious peace when Rosie and I lived happily together. Then the storm of her illness. I remembered the fragile hope when I begged Angela, the brutal betrayal when she fled, the agony of holding Rosie as she took her last breath, the shattering grief at her funeral. Tears fell again, the pain still raw. Before her grave, I whispered that I had failed to save her life. But I had secured justice, preserved my humanity, and would spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of her short existence. "I couldn't save you, Rosie," I said, voice breaking, "but I made them pay. And I'll live the rest of my life well for you, my little princess." From my own tragedy, I learned this. Money can be stolen, trust can be betrayed, but truth and conscience are the only things no one can bury forever. I thought of Angela behind bars, of the ruined Langley family. They lost everything. I kept my soul. I also left a message through my books and the fund for anyone who might one day stand where I stood. Do not let hatred devour the human being inside you. Let justice, not madness, speak for you. "Hate only hurts you more," I wrote. "Let the law and your conscience guide the way." As I walked away from the cemetery, I looked back one last time. The wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. I knew finally that I had closed the most painful chapter of my life. The grief remains, but it no longer rules me. I drove home to parents waiting with dinner, to the book I'm writing, to the children Rosie's fund will save. For the first time in years, my heart felt light enough to smile. I know Rosie is proud of her daddy.